3 miles down, in the black silence of the Pacific, a steel claw the size of a building closes around the wreck of a Soviet submarine. Above it, a ship built by billionaire Howard Hughes drifts in international waters, its crew moving with the calm precision of men who know one wrong signal could start a war. The question here was never whether the Americans had found the submarine. They had. The real question was how they planned to steal it in plain sight without the Soviet Union ever realizing it was gone. Nobody on that ship is a miner. Nobody on that ship really works for Howard Hughes. The thing rising through 6 kilometers of ocean is not a mineral sample. It is a Soviet ballistic missile submarine, lost with its entire crew, and the CIA has spent 4 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to pull it out from under the Soviet Navy's own charts. It began in 1968 when a submarine known as K-129 left port on routine patrol and never returned. Soviet ships searched for weeks, scanning the wrong stretch of ocean, following logs that pointed them hundreds of miles from the truth. They found nothing, and eventually, they stopped looking entirely. What they didn't know was that an American listening system, strung along the seafloor to catch the sound of enemy submarines, had recorded something strange. A burst of noise, then silence, in the middle of the Pacific, at almost the exact moment K-129 vanished from every Soviet radar screen. American analysts triangulated the position within a few miles, a precision the Soviets never came close to matching with all their ships and all their time. The Soviets gave up and quietly closed the file. The Americans, for the first time, opened one. Inside that submarine was something no adversary had ever recovered intact: nuclear weapons, cryptographic codebooks, the blueprint of how Soviet submarines actually worked. For an agency fighting a war made almost entirely of guesses, this wasn't a wreck. It was an open vault at the bottom of the sea, and the only lock left was depth itself. This wasn't a recovery mission. It was a theft, carried out in complete silence at the bottom of the ocean.
There was one massive problem waiting. No one had ever lifted anything this heavy from this depth, not even remotely close. Existing salvage technology stopped at a few hundred feet, a fraction of what this mission demanded. The scale was almost impossible. 6 kilometers of steel pipe, threaded together one section at a time. A claw built to cradle a shattered hull without finishing what the ocean had already started. A ship large enough to hide the entire operation from Soviet satellites sweeping overhead on a schedule the CIA had already memorized. If anything snapped down there, it would not fail slowly. It would fail instantly. One leak, one loose word, and the mission was finished before it began, with Moscow holding proof of an act of war.
So the CIA built a lie the size of a skyscraper. They approached Hughes, already famous for eccentric ambition, and asked him to publicly claim the ship as his own, a vessel built to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor. Hughes agreed. The story was so convincing that oil executives, reporters, and even naval officers believed it. Meanwhile, in a Pennsylvania shipyard, engineers built the real machine, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a ship with a moon pool cut through its center, hiding a construction almost no one outside a locked circle was permitted to understand.
By 1974, the ship reached the site, and the claw, codenamed Clementine, began its descent. For days, the operation moved at the pace of dread. Every hour multiplied the risk of catastrophic failure. Every mile of pipe carried strain engineers had only ever calculated on paper, never tested at this scale. Then, at the exact moment success felt certain, disaster struck without warning. As the claw closed around the submarine's brittle hull and began its long pull upward through miles of freezing black water, a section of Clementine's arm failed. Part of the wreck tore loose and fell back into the abyss, taking with it a portion of what the mission had come for. What remained inside the grip kept rising. Slowly, meter by meter, a piece of a nation's most guarded secret climbed toward the surface,
while Soviet reconnaissance vessels drifted nearby, close enough to watch, unaware of what moved beneath the hull they were staring at. One radio call, one photograph too many, and the mission would collapse into an international incident with a nuclear-armed rival. It didn't collapse. The recovered section broke the surface inside the ship's hidden bay, and the doors sealed over it before any outside eye could register what had been raised. Inside, analysts began examining what remained. The bodies of Soviet sailors, given quiet military honors and returned to the sea in a filmed ceremony the CIA would keep secret for decades, along with hardware that offered a rare, unfiltered look into Soviet undersea capability. The full prize was never recovered. The most valuable sections, the codebooks and warheads intelligence had hoped for, stayed lost with the piece that broke away mid-lift. Still, even a partial recovery reshaped how American strategists understood their rival. The operation's existence stayed buried until a burglary at Hughes's own offices years later handed journalists a stray reference to a project codenamed Jennifer, forcing the government into a non-denial that only deepened the mystery. The submarine was never fully recovered, but the message was. Even at the bottom of the ocean, there was nowhere left to hide. Not for secrets, not for silence, and not even for the dead, buried at sea by the very government that had just stolen their vessel out from under their nation's grief. A monument to a war fought entirely in silence, 6 kilometers down, where no one was ever meant to look.